Okay, so I think we'll get started. Hello, everyone. A very good morning to you all. Happy Friday. Welcome to the third in Stratton Craig's Win with Words webinar series. Today, we're going to be focusing on how to connect through verbal identity. So let's take a little look at what we're going to be talking about today. Firstly, in just a moment, Anna and I are going to properly introduce ourselves and tell you a bit more about Stratton Craig. Then we're going to discuss what we actually mean by tone of voice and verbal identity. We'll take a look at some of the challenges we often face as businesses when it comes to communications. And with that, we'll take a deeper dive into some of the signs that might mean reviewing your tone of voice could be helpful. We'll then have a think about some of the essential ingredients to creating an authentic tone of voice. And then once you've got there and you're happy with that authentic tone of voice, how can you make it stick? We've got a few tips to run through on that as well. Finally, we've got a poll to send your way, and then we'll have some time for questions too. So, starting with introductions, we're Stratton Craig. Hello again to those of you we've met before, or perhaps we've worked with you, or you've joined our previous webinars. Lovely to see you again. And thank you so much to the new faces who have joined us today. It's lovely to meet you. We're a content and copywriting agency based in the centre of Bristol. We work with some of the largest enterprises both in the UK and globally across a range of industries, including financial services, professional services, construction, technology, healthcare, to name a few. We offer a wide range of services as well. We're a specialist ESG and annual reporting agency, and we also support brands with their ongoing content development and their content strategies too. I'm Georgia. I'm an account director here at Stratton Craig. I've been here for about 3 years as part of the client services team, supporting clients with outlining their content requirements and then working with our wonderful specialists, our writers, strategists, editors, and proofers to deliver high quality content. I particularly focus on the content strategy side of things, working with clients on tone of voice and brand messaging. And that means I'm very lucky that I get to work very closely with Anna, who'll be presenting with me today. So I'll now hand over to Anna to introduce herself.
Thanks, Georgia. I'm a writer at Stratton Craig, and I've been here for 8 years now. And over that time, I've really specialised in tone of voice. So as well as helping clients create their tone of voice, I've also been running a few training sessions to bring their team on board with their guidelines as well. So I'm going to start off today by running us through what tone of voice is. I imagine there's going to be a real mix today of people who work in marketing and also some people who maybe don't work in marketing. So we may have a different level of familiarity with what tone of voice is. So we're just going to run through a couple of slides just to bring us all on the same page. But in essence, tone of voice is part of branding. And just like logos and fonts, it helps to reflect a business's personality. But what does that really look like in the real world? So this word here can mean very different things depending on how it's spoken. So it might just say, fine, or someone might say, oh, fine. Tone of voice is something that we naturally pick up on speech, but it's much harder to spot in the written word. Even here, it looks a little curt, but you don't really know that someone is meaning to sound a bit cheesed off. They could be absolutely fine. You just can't really tell from the written word. And so here are a couple more examples to show tone of voice in action. So this one here, I'll read it out for you. Dog guardians, in a world where everyone is looking out for number one, who's taking care of number two? Pick up after your dogs. And the next one, Park's notebook, pick up the kids after school, pick up the milk on the way home, and pick up after the dogs. So these are real signs that were put up in Vancouver a number of years ago now. And you can see they've used a light tone with a sense of humour to get people to cooperate. And it did actually work. So the sign writer became a local hero, and they did spot a real reduction in dog mess. And we've actually seen lots of other cities now following suit. We're based in Bristol, and we've seen loads more comical signs around all sorts of places, notably bins, but lots of places like that. And of course, we're not suggesting that all businesses sound like this, and it's not something we would recommend to a lot of the clients that we work with based on the industries that they're in. but it does show the kind of impact that tone can have. And next, Georgia's going to run through a bit more about what that can look like in business writing we typically see.
So many of our clients come to us as often they might be facing challenges when it comes to communicating consistently and authentically. And that is because it is really hard. When we're able to take a step back and work with them to review their broader content strategies and planning, we often find some common themes driving these issues. There might be different stakeholders to please, and they could be both internal and external. You might have a number of audiences, particularly if you've got a range of products and services that you offer. You might have lots of people across the business who need to feed into the communications that you're sending out. And with that, you might end up having quite a few different messages to share in one piece of content. These challenges often lead to a diluted tone, and that can lead to inconsistent content and maybe content that doesn't necessarily reflect the brand. So let me ask you, if we have a diluted tone, how does business writing sound? These are some of the things that we often find, and I wonder if any of you have spotted these themes as well. So sometimes it leads to content that is quite complex and complicated. Then it might be difficult to hold on to that structure. It might lose the flow and might be quite difficult for your audience to follow. Sometimes it becomes quite technical. It might be harder for non-experts to understand, and these non-experts might be your customers or your clients. And because of the technical language, the customers and clients might struggle to understand the benefit to them. Following on from the technical language, it might also lean into being quite formal. And that's often a space where I think we find ourselves quite comfortable in a professional environment, but sometimes that can be distancing for our audiences. We might accidentally use quite a lot of jargon, perhaps acronyms that we're all sort of familiar with internally, or other different forms of internal speak. And sometimes this can lead it to be essentially quite dull, but it doesn't have to be. Here's an example of an apology that we find very interesting to discuss. You might remember back in 2018, KFC ran out of chicken and had to close a lot of its stores. I know the copy is quite small on the screen there, so I'm just going to read it out. A chicken restaurant without any chicken. It's not ideal. Huge apologies to our customers, especially those who travelled out their way to find we were closed. It's been a hell of a week, but we're making progress. And every day, more and more fresh chicken is being delivered to our restaurants. Thank you for bearing with us. So we can see here they've used humour to diffuse the tension of the situation, present their human side and offer a genuine apology, and in doing so, winning back customers. Of course, it's important to note here that this only works because of the context. We presume that no lives were in danger, so the humour was okay. And we're also, of course, not suggesting that all businesses can use this kind of language. And obviously, there would have been cultural implications and other implications to consider in terms of how appropriate this advert is. But the point is, we can sometimes move away from more formal words to stay authentic but have a stronger impact. Here's another interesting example. This time, it's one of IBM's annual reports. It says, "You're one page away from the no-holds-barred story of 1 year in the life of a company." I'll let everyone read through the rest of it as I carry on speaking, but we wanted to highlight that this uses emotive language to convey a sense of passion and purpose for the company, but also acknowledging with honesty that it's had some difficulties in the use of the term stinging defeats. We write a lot of annual reports and we don't see too many sort of creative front pages as is this, but it does show that even big businesses don't need to use overly technical language sometimes to have an impact. Anna is now going to show you why stepping away from what we might describe as typical business writing is really important.
Thanks, Georgia. So clients often tell us they get pushback from colleagues when they try to soften language, and this can especially happen in some of those more complex or technical sectors. So this research paper is a really helpful way of demonstrating why sometimes we do need to move away from overly formal language. And this was written by a professor at Princeton University called Oppenheimer, which is a different Oppenheimer to the one we're currently being familiar with. And I'll just read out the title for you, but bear with me because it is a little bit wordy. So it says, Consequences of erudite vernacular utilised irrespective of necessity, meaning problems with using long words needlessly. He noticed that his first year students were using really long and complex sentences when they were trying to make themselves sound really clever at university. And that's something that I'm sure many of us here did as well. He did a test to see if it actually did make them sound more intelligent or if it was just kind of putting on a front. He rewrote those papers into much plainer English, and then he tested both versions with a broad audience. And the plain English ones consistently rated as more intelligent and more persuasive than the others. It just goes to show that formal or professional language doesn't always actually make you sound smarter. And it's worth bearing in mind that Oppenheimer did actually win a Nobel Prize for this paper. So it had quite a big impact, I believe, on the academic world as well. So if you're finding yourself getting trapped using complex and overly formal language, which is really, really common, that might be one sign that you or perhaps your client, if you're an agency based, that you or your client needs a tone of voice. But here are some others. So this one here was actually a sign that was put up at Piccadilly Circus, and you can see from the clock that it's rush hour. And it's very difficult to understand. It says pedestrian casualty reduction signal timings experiment. And we think that that's to do with testing different traffic light timings. So I believe they're asking drivers just to take care, be a bit careful at the moment. You know, you might be used to different signal timings or different traffic lights than you normally are. But the tone here is completely ineffective because it's far too difficult for drivers to understand what they need to do, especially when there's heavy traffic and they're just trying to get across London. And this is obviously quite an extreme example. And in business writing, an ineffective tone can be a little bit more difficult to spot. So here we've just popped together some phrases that we see all the time in business writing. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. So no one here, if you use them, no one here is in trouble for using them at all. But because they are used so often, they don't really say that much about what a business really stands for. So we say to clients that if you're finding that you're using a lot of these kinds of phrases, it could be a sign that there's room to inject a bit more personality into your brand language. And here are some other really common signs that your tone of voice might need a rethink. So it might be inconsistent, and that can present in a number of different ways. So it might be that the web content, for example, sounds very different from customer comms or social media posts. Or you might feel that you need to write in a really different way for different audiences, and that can really then feed into that inconsistency again, because you can't presume that one audience will only look at one type of content. They might also be looking at other content you've got elsewhere, you know, on your website, for example. You might find that only one person or one team is really able to write in that way. And it could be that it's a really creative tone of voice, and that's great. But it should be something that everyone can implement. So it might not be that the whole tone of voice needs to change, but maybe the guidance around it needs a rethink. It could be that it just feels false. So it's inauthentic to the company and what it actually stands for. And that's a bit like those phrases on the previous slide. And then it might be something quite simple as, you know, your business has evolved, your goals have shifted, or your audience has changed a little bit. The tone no longer really resonates with people it needs to. And so it could be a real opportunity to use tone of voice to reach those new audiences and achieve those business goals that you set out to. So next, you're just going to take you through some pointers on creating that tone of voice.
So when we're working with clients on tone of voice, it's of course very important to collaborate very closely with the team and really get under the skin of the business so we can make sure that their tone of voice is authentic and therefore unique to each business. But we know that tone of voice all have share some traits, or good ones have share some traits. And in our view, they are all authentic, distinctive, and practical. So we've already taken a look at authenticity with a couple of the previous examples, but we're just now going to have a quick look at how to be distinctive and practical when it comes to tone. So we've drafted this line here just for demonstration purposes, as it's representative of some typical business writing. Our point is it's quite hard to tell which sector the business could be in. It could be tech, energy, marketing, But it's also hard to spot what it does, the services it offers, and the value it could add to its customers or clients. And that's because, again, it's using quite generic language. So in this way, lots of businesses are missing a trick to set themselves apart from competition. And that's why having a distinctive tone of voice can really help with that. So now thinking about being practical and making sure that your tone of voice is easy to implement, as Anna's already mentioned, this is an example of a tone of voice principle that we might develop for a client and the way we might present it. We've chosen clear here as clarity is always important, but it's always going to be something that's achieved in different ways for different clients. So this can't be applied directly to everyone. So you can see that rather than presenting a principle with a lofty explanation, we really try to support it with clear and pragmatic advice on how to put it into practice.
Lovely. So for this final section, we're going to quickly run through some tips on how to make sure a tone of voice is actively used and doesn't gather dust on the shelf. And obviously, we believe that creating a tone of voice is a really valuable exercise, but the true value is going to come through if people are actively using it. So it's really important that everyone is on board and everyone's using it. So the most important thing is that you get buy-in from the top. So we always say that senior stakeholders should be included in the conversations when you're helping to create that tone of voice. That's really important for that authenticity point, but also to make sure that the tone of voice aligns with strategic goals, because we want to make sure that this exercise is really effective at achieving those business outcomes. Then we want to make sure that the guidelines have those really practical tips like Georgia shared, and these should be catered to kind of the people right of your organisation. So if you find that it's mostly marketeers, you might find that you can have slightly more complex writing techniques in there, or it might be that you need to really make sure that they're really simple and easy to understand for people who are not so confident with writing. And obviously, there's a way of doing that so that it doesn't feel patronising, so that it feels really practical and easy to pick up by anyone. Then another really important point is that we've got to include some guidance on flex. And that's really important for making sure that your tone of voice works for every scenario and that people feel really confident using it no matter what they have to write. So you might find, for example, that you're not going to write a reply to a complaint in the same way that you would write a social media post, and that is absolutely fine and something we would recommend as well, to kind of flex that tone for those different contexts. And we say that flexing is all about leaning into the principles that are most appropriate for each situation. So they will still share some common traits with other pieces of content. They don't feel completely distinct, but they do feel right to the situation. And then we say to include a real range of examples, and this is something we see in all sorts of tone of voice guidelines. So before and after examples is pretty typical. But we always say it's really important, as well as including things like web copy, fun marketing emails, stuff like that that's a bit more creative and that can kind of really ramp up what the tone of voice might look like. We say it's also important to include some examples for those more difficult scenarios that you have to communicate in, so that people feel comfortable no matter what they have to communicate. And then here are just a couple more tips for embedding the tone of voice into the business more broadly. So bring your people with you, and hopefully the tips I've shared before will help people do that, but you can go one step further and really train them. So there's a misconception that you can't train people to write well, a bit like you can't train someone to be an artist. But you absolutely can, or at least you can train people to write better or more on brand, or to just feel a bit more confident. And so it's really important to run some training to bring everyone on board. And then another tip we have that we really recommend to clients is that if there's someone in their team, for example, who feels like they really get the tone of voice, they're really running it, they feel confident using it, that they can become a guardian and they can review other people's work, give them tips, and make sure that everything's really on brand there. And then it's just a case of starting to use it. So we suggest that it can be quite a big task when you get a new tone of voice, you feel you have a lot of content to change. So we just suggest starting with something like the website and then using that as a guide for everywhere else. or it might be a sales brochure or another really important part of communications that you need to put across, and then use that as a guide. And then we say that in a year or so, when you've had time to start implementing it, you run a bit of an audit to see if there's perhaps some older content that's still in the public realm and that you might be able to adapt and bring a bit more up to date as well. So that's largely the talking done for us, and we'd love to get your input next. So we'll move on to the questions and poll part of this webinar.
Thank you, Anna. So up on the screen now, there's a poll that we would love to get your input on, please. And then next we'll hand over to open the floor to all of you to ask some questions. But in the meantime, if you'd be kind enough to fill in the poll for us and answer the questions, that would be great. This is the first time we're doing it, but it's popped up on my screen, so I hope everyone else has received that too. I'll just give you some time to fill that in. Great, thank you very much. Hopefully we've got some answers through there. I think we'll be going through those after the session today, so thank you very much. That's really, really helpful. So now what we're going to do next is open the floor to our audience and attendees to see if they've got any questions.
I can see one in, so yeah, I'll pick that one up if that's okay. So the first one we've got here is about tone of voice sounding quite similar to lots of competitors. And is that a tone of voice issue or is it a messaging issue? So you've said here that you have clear tone of voice guidelines, so that's great. But I do think it might still be the tone, because messaging is a bit more about what you say, whereas tone is more about how you say it. And it sounds like if you're having an issue with the way that you sound, it sounds like that really is more of a tone point of view. So it might be that the guidelines just need a couple of tweaks to emphasize a bit more personality here and there. And that will probably involve kind of taking a look at perhaps your competitors and seeing opportunities to stand out.
We've got another question through here from Rasheen, asking what the process is for determining the right tone of voice for a brand or business. Thank you for that question. So part of our process is really tailoring our approach for the business that we're working with. So we will very much start out by understanding the challenges and building a scope of work from that point to make sure that we can get a clear picture of the business and where its goals and ambitions, and to make sure that we can work really closely to build that authentic tone of voice.
Great, thank you. We've got here a question about making sure that tone of voice guidelines work for both long copy as well as short form copy. So this is really common and something we find a lot with clients. So it might be a case of going back to the tone of voice principles themselves to begin with, just to make sure that they are actually appropriate for all of the kind of communications that you need to do. And it might be that you need another principle in there, or one of those principles could be tweaked a little bit. And then other than that, we say it's really about that practicality. So including those tone of voice and those writing techniques, to really explain how you would put those into practice. And that's where those examples will come through. So it's great you said here you've got some great short form copy examples and things like that. If you are able to include those more challenging communications, then you should be able to show people how to bridge the gap there. And again, that flexing as well will be important.
So then moving on to, sorry, Anna.
No, it's quite a big question, so hopefully I've helped you there.
Moving on to the question I've got here from Carlos, about people often writing as if they're writing to themselves rather than keeping their audience in mind, and sometimes there's not much training on that. So training is, as we've mentioned, very important, and of course tailored training as well is something that we're really sort of passionate about, in terms of really understanding the needs of the people that you're working with and the various teams, and making sure that the training sessions are specifically tailored to the needs of that team, those groups, and offering training on lots of different levels and in lots of different formats as well, to make sure everyone can be empowered with that confidence to write as your brand.
Thank you. We've got one here that says, my company is trying to adopt a more casual, witty and engaging tone of voice, but it's difficult to balance that with remaining professional, given that it's a B2B finance company. Absolutely, that's a really common challenge and something that we work really closely with clients to overcome. It's likely to be a case of really thinking about the different writing techniques that you can use to employ that engaging, witty tone of voice. So it might be that you might want to warn people away from puns and things like that. And actually, it might just be a case of adding pace to your language and tips like that. So I think it will be a case of maybe looking at examples of writing that you like and writing that you don't, and trying to find the techniques that you think really resonate with you and your audience.
There's one more, we've received one more question there about making sure that a tone of voice is memorable. I think that's sort of twofold. There's a discussion around the distinctive element there, and how far brands can go in terms of making themselves stand out through their tone of voice. But also part of making sure tone of voice is memorable comes through that consistency point. So again, that training and that overarching view of your content, and making sure that your tone of voice is implemented consistently across all channels and across all types of content, will really help with making that tone memorable as well. So I think that's all the questions here for the day. So otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope we answered some of your questions. If you have any further questions, please do get in touch with us. It'd be fantastic to hear from you. We'll send out a follow-up survey after our webinar to gather your thoughts, and there'll be an opportunity to get in touch with us then again if you had any further questions. But otherwise, thank you so much again for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. It's great to have everyone with us today.